If I were to get a tattoo, would it change the way people look at me? Body art, which includes primarily tattoos and bodily piercings, has exploded in popularity recently, especially among younger populations. For example, a recent college survey found that about 22% of men and women equally have at least one bodily tattoo, and about 40 to 60% have one body piercing, and that doesn't count in the earlobe. So with all these people getting some type of body art, it begs the question, does this change the way we might perceive others? Several large-scale studies in both the US and in other Western areas like Australia and Europe have found that when people view others with tattoos, they tend to see them as being less attractive, intelligent, caring, and trustworthy. And this is controlling for things like the target's social economic status, attire, age, race, and gender. For a lot of people, seeing someone with a tattoo engenders negative stereotypes that then bias their perceptions. One way we can tell that there are negative stereotypes in play is by presenting participants with the same target, sometimes a photograph of a person, or sometimes a CGI representation of a person, and then digitally alter them in such a way so that half include a tattoo or a piece of body art. Studies that do this show that just by digitally including a tattoo or body piercing can do things like lower someone's perceived attractiveness, as well as lower their perceived intelligence, caring, and honesty. So in this way, people aren't really judging the person when they're looking at someone with body art. They're more judging them based just to the fact on that they have a tattoo or bodily piercing. These negative stereotypes about people with tattoos and piercings might really impact people in the job market. For example, a few recent studies by this guy named Dwayne Dean gave people hypothetical scenarios in which they were interacting with either a white-collar worker, a tax preparer, or a blue-collar worker, a mechanic. Across the board, whether participants were young or old, male or female, if they were hypothetically working with a tax preparer and that person had a visible tattoo, most of the people said that that was highly inappropriate for their field and gave the person lower scores and ratings like competence, skill, and how much they enjoyed interacting with that person. They were also more likely to say that they would not recommend that person to their family or friends regardless of the quality of their service. At least with younger people, they were more forgiving toward people who had tattoos if they worked in blue-collar jobs, so for example being a mechanic. But even in these professions, a tattoo was enough to garner lower favorability ratings among older populations, those 45 and older. In fact, a recent survey of HR personnel and college admissions officers found that about 87% said that a visible tattoo was enough to disqualify some people from getting hired on a job or getting into a private university. One white-collar profession where it might actually be a good thing to have a tattoo is actually in being a college professor. So one study at least showed that when people looked at a photograph of supposed professors with half of them having a tattoo digitally added in, those who saw the professor with the tattoo were more likely to rate that person as probably being a lot of fun and imaginative and someone they'd probably recommend to friends. So at least with college professors, it might actually pay you to get a little ink. So with all these negative stereotypes about people with body art, could it be that people who get tattoos and bodily piercings really are less attractive, intelligent, trustworthy, and honest than those who don't? Well, a lot of research points out that there may be a very small kernel of truth to this idea. So lots of large-scale studies have looked at populations of thousands of people with body art and compared them to thousands of people without body art, controlling for things like social economic status, age, race, and gender. And they do find that those with body art tend to be a bit lower in things like agreeableness and conscientiousness. Agreeableness is someone's tendency to be empathetic, caring, and trustworthy, and conscientiousness is someone's tendency to be hardworking, prepared for the future, and perhaps a bit perfectionistic. So in this case, there's a small kernel of truth to the idea that people with body art might be a bit less caring and empathetic and industrious versus those without, but these differences were very, very small. In fact, most of the studies show that they explain no more than 2% of variability within these traits. So while people with tattoos and bodily piercings might be a tiny bit lower in things like being industrious and caring and empathetic, it's definitely not true that when you see someone with body art, you can pinpoint that as someone who is lazy, unintelligent, uncaring, and untrustworthy. They're just a tiny bit below average on average. These same large-scale studies show that there are actually larger personality differences in things like sensation-seeking, need for uniqueness, and impulsivity. So with need for uniqueness, we all have a bit of that. None of us want to be just like everyone else in the herd. But people who get tattoos and bodily piercings tend to be high in this trait, meaning that they need to feel unique in order to have a sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And this makes perfect sense. When you get a tattoo or bodily piercing, you're literally marking your body with a sign of uniqueness. You're differentiating yourself from the crowd. Also, people who get tattoos especially tend to be higher in sensation seeking, so maybe more likely to be what we call adrenaline junkies, and a little bit more impulsive, less likely to think about how their decisions might impact their future. And if you think about it, especially when getting a tattoo, that's kind of a requirement. So if you're going to get a piece of body art that you're going to have for decades to come, it might pay to be a little impulsive for you to make the final decision of what you want. After all, who knows if you're going to be happy with whatever you choose 2, 3, or 4 decades down the road. Also, with sensation seeking, or being a quote-unquote adrenaline junkie, that really helps in getting a tattoo, because then you can enjoy that adrenaline rush that you naturally get whenever you harm yourself. In other words, when a tattoo needle might be hitting your skin, or a needle might be going through your earlobe or some other part of your body. So in this case, you can enjoy that adrenaline rush enough to ignore the pain and then come back and maybe get another tattoo and another piercing. One particularly powerful stereotype, especially of women who have body art, is that they tend to be, well, promiscuous or easy. One study that looked at the power of this stereotype staged actresses all around beaches alongside Britain and France and had half of them wear small but realistic butterfly tattoos on their lower back. In this case, all the actresses were assigned to just lay down on their stomachs on beach towels and pretend to read a book and just ignore everyone around them. And then they had observers rate how many times men would stop by and talk to them unsolicited. In other words, how many times did they get guys to flirt with them just by lying on the beach? During observational periods where the women were wearing a lower back tattoo, they were 2.5 times more likely to be contacted by men who happened to pass by. In fact, those in the tattoo group only spent an average of 20 minutes between each time that a guy came up and flirted with them. After these men left the actress, an experimenter would catch up to them and tell them that they were in an experiment, fully debrief them, and then give them a post-experimental survey. And guys said that when they passed by these women, if they wore a lower back tattoo, they were about 25% more likely to say that they could probably get a date with that woman, and about 40% more likely to say that that woman probably gave it up on the first date. What was interesting is that between conditions, there was no difference in perceived attractiveness. So the only reason that these guys were more likely to flirt with women with a lower back tattoo was because they perceived them as easier. So this stereotype might once again have a small kernel of truth to it. So some very large-scale studies have found that when they compare people with tattoos and piercings versus those without, again controlling for things like social economic status, age, race, and gender, those with tattoos and bodily piercings do tend to have sex at earlier ages, with more partners, and are more likely to be quote-unquote promiscuous, in some cases operationalizing it as having sex with 5 or more people per year. So with all of these negative stereotypes about people with body art, I think people should carefully consider how others might view them if they get a tattoo or bodily piercing, especially if they're a woman, and especially if they're working in a white-collar profession where it might not be acceptable. But should that mean that people shouldn't get body art? I don't think so. A lot of studies have shown that when people do get tattoos or bodily piercings, they tend to be very happy with the outcome. So for example, one study in Great Britain followed people as they came into tattoo parlors and surveyed individuals right before, right afterward, and then again 3 weeks after getting their very first tattoo. In this case, they found that getting a tattoo often led to higher levels of self-esteem and feelings of uniqueness. So it's clear that by getting body art, it can help people feel better about themselves, but it can negatively impact how others view them. If you want to get a tattoo or bodily piercing, I think a nice compromise is to get one where it's not visible all the time. So for example, in a place where you could easily cover it up at work. This way, you could show it off to people that you like and who already like you, but it's not going to negatively impact your interactions with strangers, coworkers, and people who might or may not employ you. So I think that by getting a non-visible tattoo, you can really mitigate that ability to feel good about yourself, to feel unique, but not to turn other people off from you. Of course, if you really want to get that visible tattoo or bodily piercing, I say go for it. I think sometimes some misunderstandings, or maybe perhaps even people disliking you, is just the cost of what it is to be truly unique. Well, It's tattoo time! Tattoo time, Callie! Yeah, good job. It's tattoo time, it's tattoo time, it's...
2 hours later.
Hey, Callie! Who's the little they? You liking my tattoo? It's not too gangster, is it? Oh, good. You like? Come here, little kissy.